So none of you could blush while I was singing your praises. Okay, I am, as you can probably tell, overjoyed to be with these three incredible thinkers and to be with all of you today. And let's get right into the discussion and begin with the very question of today's panel. Who owns the waters of the upper Midwest? I'd like to invite each of you, maybe we'll start first left to right and then we'll pivot and go in many directions today. So I'd like each of you to weigh in on this question of who owns the waters, while also giving us your feelings on whether or not people can actually own water. And let's dig in. How has the idea of owning water been applied in counterproductive ways? What are some of the outcomes of this idea that people or corporations can own water? And what do we gain or lose by thinking in terms of this paradigm of ownership? Frank, can we start with you?
When you turned on your tap this morning to brush your teeth or to get a drink of water, and water came out, you probably are paying a water bill, either directly or indirectly. And you might have thought that you were buying water, but you're not. What you're doing is you're buying the service of having water delivered to your house, because you can't own the water. I'd say you can't own the water any more than you can own the air. How many of you paid for the air you're breathing right now? Okay? So the idea is you can't own the air, you can't own the water, but we need fresh air, so we have air conditioning, we have people that work on that, we have filtering systems, we do all of that, but we also do the same thing with water. But we have this, water is life, it's critical. And so I maintain you can't own the water, and that we don't, if we have to get out of that thought that water is a commodity that can be owned or traded or sold. And I'm going to pass it on now.
Well, I'll have to disagree with you right out of the starting block, because on the World Wide Web, they're selling air. I make that preposterous assertion because they are selling air on the internet, but because the profound strangeness of the idea doesn't really operate to slow our roll where commoditization is concerned. So with the wealthiest of earthlings looking for new homes in outer space, and the example many of us will never forget of who got left on the rooftops of Katrina, we understand that, you know, if it came down to it, and if you've read The Uninhabitable Earth by William Walker Wells, you might be understanding that the days of needing a backup air supply might not be too far away. But to understand the dangerous, preposterous, precarious position we've put ourselves in, as capitalists, we believe, you know, we have these rights to earn money. We have a dynamic infrastructure of finance to make sure that people can buy and sell things. And we've never stopped to question at the level of decision makers whether there is even a right. Some of you may have noticed, I think it was definitely this month, that the United Church of Christ just made the bold statement as an institution that joining others, but as a mainstream church in America, it's strange to see us declare that the earth herself has rights, and our relationship to each other and the way we treat the earth is pretty much the same, We're not in right relation. We don't cherish and cultivate kinship, and we are reaping the fruits of that. So even though the United Nations back in 2010 declared water, access to water, clean, safe water and sanitation, a human right for life essential services and dignity, human dignity, the American government has never taken that step. California took that step in 2012. Chicago's so far at the polar opposite of that, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But you gotta make your choice, America. You're either commoditization, free rights, you can do what you please, or you're going to recognize the commons and get back to common sense.
Let's talk about the commons. That is something that I think we all as humans understand, that there are inalienable connections to natural resources that can never be privatized or commodified. And water holds that space. Air holds that space. And the absurdity that you talk about this has been put into film with the recent Lorax, where I think his name is O'Hare, isn't that right? Where he's selling air. And as children, they understand that that should never happen and can never happen. What has happened, well, let me back up. To put the word ownership and water in the same sentence, to me, is the wrong framework. And just as I said, I think that we all intrinsically understand that the waters belong to all of us, and they must be protected as a commons. And you know, Frank has taught me a lot over these past years, and it is about the relationships that we have, not only as humans, but as we have to the natural world and to the waters, and our role as water protectors. Even in Western jurisprudence, Roman fishermen, 1600, 100 years ago, understood that the air and water and seas could not be owned by Justinian, Emperor Justinian. And that has come down, passed through Roman law to England, and then to the shores here in the United States, known as public trust law. And what public trust law says is that the states are sovereigns and protectors of our navigable public waters in perpetuity for all of us as beneficiaries. And what I will just quickly kind of wrap this comment up is to say that what we are seeing that's happened, I would say, in the last 30 plus years, where there is a, with the neoliberal effort of market forces to commodify and make our water a commodity on Wall Street, that is a new tension that we are seeing. There's always been a right to use water under Western law, even out west, and we can talk about that, but it is not a right to own or to sell. And that is an issue that I would argue is as important as climate change. And this is an issue that will only become increasingly important with the water scarcity and contamination that we're seeing around the globe.
Okay, so everyone just saw in classic Humanities fashion, we have completely undone the title of this presentation, just making sure we're all up to date on our humanistic method, right? You have a title to undo it. And just to provide all of you with a little bit of shorthand, Frank, I'm thinking about your work on indigenous diets high in fish as a way to expand water quality protections. Naomi, I think about your fight to increase water accessibility through paradigms of Black sovereignty. Liz, you've been using public trust law to try to get an aging pipeline. That's the Line 5 pipeline that carries tar sands, right? The heaviest and most toxic form of energy on Earth. And guess what, Chicago? Guess who the biggest user of the tar sands are? You got it, right? We can hang our heads in shame and talk about that a little bit. But Liz, I think about how you've been using public trust law to try to decommission this pipeline. And so now that we've dispensed with ownership, and you each touched on this a bit, but I'm wondering what paradigm you might hold up for us today about how to structure and represent our relationship with water. So once we've thrown away ownership, right, what would you each give us from your own work? And maybe Liz, will start with you and come this way, and next round we'll start with Naomi.
Well, Rachel always delivers wonderful context and questions, so I wanted to just appreciate you for bringing us all together. There are not a lot of laws, when I, as a lawyer, thinking about how we can protect our resources in terms of the relationship with stewardship, anti-commodification efforts, and the environmental movement, national movement in this country is 50 years old. You think back to the National Environmental Protection Act. The Clean Water Act is going to celebrate 50 years next year. Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act, etc. Most of those laws talk about, give a license to pollute, and the paradigm and I think the promise of public trust law is inspiring in that it talks about a stewardship relationship with the water, about the states protecting the paramount interests of the water and the uses of navigation and commerce and fishing and swimming, recreation, drinking water, and sustenance. And we, and the other piece to it is that there's an intergenerational equity demand in public trust law. And that is a very unique duty that we don't see in our jurisprudence. So I'm going to just lift that up for the moment and pass this on to you, Naomi.
Well, in the Black community, we and tying to Frank's structural thought about having a right to use the water but not to own it, I think the delivery systems without which we can't use the water become super critical. And here in Chicago, we have possibly, well, we definitely have one of the country's worst water management agencies. The Chicago, telling it like I see it, don't have to agree, but the Chicago Department of Water has disgraced itself over the last epoch of time with its practices around affordability. If people have no right to water, then they have shutoffs. That what we experienced during the pandemic was we could see through the maps that we generated where those operating without water lived. We had to fight and are still fighting for just the public interest data about the historic shutoffs. We had to fight to get a moratorium against shutoffs. We are going to be presenting at Chicago Water Week in the 12th through the 17th. Do come and enjoy a talk about aggressive collection practices. You can lose your home in Chicago around water. The debt collection practices which the city of Chicago engages in. There's a trifurcated process: the Department of Water, financial regulation, and then the third-party collection agencies. And we have been talking about this for a year now. And when we had the opportunity with the retirement of this past water commissioner to really dig in and do a deep tissue search for a person of the kind of character with the kind of commitment that had an understanding about justice, had an understanding about infrastructural best practices, we at Blacks and Green did a mock search for that commissioner, for that new commissioner. And we found a brilliant woman who we tried to woo away from Cincinnati, but she says, I'm good. And what the city of Chicago missed the opportunity to do by simply promoting an internal person who had been there for decades, they missed the opportunity to transform our very ground of being about water. That, and of course, lead pipes are a big issue. The state water plan is being rewritten. All of these things from the federal, state, and city level are being reinterpreted now. What a perfect time to be able to redefine how we as human beings are going to interact with each other and with the stewardship of the land. And anyone drinking bottled water, got to look in the mirror. That's a practice that's not sustainable. Stop it.
Actually, I'm going to take on at that point right there is that a bottle of water, if you go to the store, people say, hey, we buy water all the time. We go and buy these bottles of water. But once again, you're not buying the water. You think of that bottle of water as just a short piece of pipe with a cap at both ends. And what you're doing is you're buying the service of having that water delivered to you. And it'd be better if it wasn't in plastic that's got to be redone, all the stuff that you have to do with it, that's a different issue. But the question of whether you own the water or not, when you go and pick up a bottle of water somewhere, you're not buying the water. Once again, you're not buying the water. And so that there are some people, some of those folks, for instance, that you've talked about who have water shut off, they have no alternative but to use bottled water. They have no alternative but to use those things that are brought to them to help them get through. So, for instance, we were delivering bottled water to Flint, even though I detest bottled water.
And I have to agree with you there, Frank, because we were delivering bottled water every weekend from 12 to 2 at our storefront. But
and I don't like that at all. But on the other hand, we had to do those things because that was a way of getting water to those people. But once again, it's not sell. So let me sort of address this issue in talking about, and I tell this particular story is about fish particularly, but it actually relates to the entire natural world. But my ancestors signed treaties, and those treaties we reserved the rights, fishing rights. And when we did that, we didn't stand down by the water and look out there and say, those are our fish. We reserved the right to fish, and what did that mean? There's a thing called the canons of construction that you interpret. Treaties are interpreted following these things, and one of them is that the way the native people would have understood them at the time they were signed. And so when our ancestors reserved fishing rights, they reserved the right to sing for the fish, to dance for the fish, to pray for the fish, to catch and eat the fish, but to live with the fish, to have a relationship with the fish. They didn't think of it as property. They didn't think the fish as property. They were relatives. And so the fish, they have a responsibility, sacred duties, to make lots of fish. Why? They don't need to make that many to survive, but they make a lot of fish. And why do they do that? Because they have to feed other fish. They have to feed the eagles and the ospreys and the loons, and they feed people. And part of their sacred duty is to do these things. And so our duty, our sacred duties, are to protect the environment in which they live, to protect that environment so that they have a place to live, so they can continue to do what they are supposed to do. Well, this is not just true of fish. It's true of the food plants. It's true of the waters themselves. It's true of the view of the night sky. It's true of all of this, all of nature, that we have this, we're all related. We have relatives. And when you think of the fact that all of this is relationship based, it's all relatives, then you're not going to treat your mother in the way that you might treat, well, it's okay if we don't drink out of that stream. We'll dump our garbage and sewage over there because we got another stream. Well, we can't do that. That's not the way we need to be thinking. And I think this is that fundamental difference in worldview that is so important, what indigenous people have to help bring. And I was just on a call with indigenous people from all over the earth just before this meeting right now. And we were talking about these very issues. How do we protect nature but also protect our relationship to nature? How do we respect that relationship of how we care for all of the things that are there? And water is an absolutely essential part of all of that. So in all of these discussions is access to clean water, as it's the responsibility that we have for caring for the natural world, and how that natural world then cares for us.
Thank you. Let's maybe come right to our watershed right now, because absorbing all that you're saying, really struck by this paradox of living around the Great Lakes. Over 1/5 of the world's fresh water, this remarkable ecosystem that at least theoretically can't be owned, right? Something to which all of us who live here can access and use. And yet, this host of problems, whether shutoffs in Detroit and Chicago, the Line 5 pipeline, the over-extraction of water pollution, the lead pipes, right? I mean, so we're in this region of abundant water and really deep and severe water crises. And when I'm up here with all of you, not to mention when I'm in conversation with each of you, I'm like, we're gonna be okay, right? We've got this because we've got this kind of thinking. But of course, we're all up against these power structures, like you were speaking about, Naomi. So I wonder, let's maybe take a little time if you would each reflect on this paradox of the possibility and promise and miraculousness of this watershed, and yet the severity of what needs to be addressed and changed. And Naomi, if we could start with you, and then Frank, and then we'll round to Liz.
Well, I do a lot, Blacks and Green does a lot of work in the energy realm as well. And one of the things that we're struggling with right now is in the process of defining what the best technology will be, we are overlooking the fact that there's no technology we can come up with that will not be subverted for the status quo if we are not first addressing how we are together as human beings. There is no substitute, quick fix. There's no dodge to it. And anything that we do is going to turn out the same when we think that we can relegate certain people to the other, to the under. And if we can dominate and steal, and if we can lie and sequester. So everything that you talk about with regard to the situation that we're in right now, in any realm, is always going to double back to, are we in right relation? And so, you know, we talk about at Blacks and Green new terms of engagement with allies and others. We're talking about Kingian nonviolent thinking and how we are able to heal ourselves from the intentional harms of others. I will not be able to give you a better answer about what can work and what can never work, other than to say it begins right here and it ends there. Fix that, you fix everything. Don't fix that, and you fix nothing.
I was waiting to see if that was one of those pregnant pauses. No, but I really agree with that. We have to change the way we think, and we need to find the answers are there. You know, when we talk about indigenous people, what we say is everyone is indigenous to the earth. And people, some people are further away from their indigenous roots than others. Some people may be adrift completely from those original teachings, those teachings that are part of their indigeneity. But those teachings still exist. And they talk about this respect for nature, the respect for each other, and those respect for those other beings. And if you're going to respect the beings that fly at night, then you don't make a lot of light pollution, because they can't, that messes up their systems. If you have all the lights that are on all night, all these times, I saw a really interesting radar picture when I was here in Chicago about 5 years ago. We were taking a tour through the Great Lakes Water Quality Board, and we were coming down along the shore. We were visiting different places, and they showed us these pictures that they had on radar of what it looks like in the evening. And they had this radar set so that it would pick up birds and bats, things that flew. And as it got dusk, all of a sudden, the whole world just sort of came alive with people, with birds, all these different birds that were migrating, flying, and everywhere. And then just at sunrise, it all comes back down. So we don't see this. This happens at night. But these are our relatives. And when we do things that interfere with their ability to function, well, it interferes with us. It's something like a 40% decline in insects right now. And the insects feed the birds. We often eat birds, okay? And so that affects our food supply. What happens is these things are happening because of the way that we have that respect. So what Naomi's talked about here is that relationship. It isn't just a relationship from person to person. It isn't just our economic thought if we think of the economy as strictly being a human economy. The economy it's a world economy. It's an economy based on all of life and how life relates to each other. And there's every part, everything plays a part. You know, we were having a conversation earlier back in, I don't know if it's the green room or a different room or wherever it was we were here before, but we were talking about viruses. I said, well, are all viruses bad? We just assume that, we just say they are. But, you know, viruses, that's part of the web of life. You know, and so I think that we have to realize that everything has a purpose, everything has a place, and that we have to come to understand that. And I believe this, as what Naomi has said, I think this is a really important thing for us to try to embrace those thoughts and to find out how do we move from where we've been, which is we don't know these things, to where we're going to be in order to help us protect the waters. So this question about who owns the waters, well, we've already decided that nobody owns them. But the point is we all have a responsibility for them. So.
So much to say here. It is all about the relationships that we have. Living here in the Great Lakes is a blessing and a gift. We have a globally unique responsibility to protect 20% of the world's fresh surface water. If we don't get it right here, where are we going to get it right? We have forgotten what this gift means. It's how Joni Mitchell has told it, pave paradise and put up a parking lot. We have forgotten and taken it for granted. And, if you travel around this country, especially in the American Southwest, I used to live in Tucson. I mean, when I lived there, it wasn't, in the 90s, I couldn't believe that there was civilization there even then, because they didn't recognize that there are these human limits that we're talking about, and also limits of the natural world. And in the Great Lakes, we have, back to the West, sorry, the droughts, the fires, the climate change, migrations that will happen. People are going to be moving here to the Great Lakes. And, as you indicated, we have these extraordinary crises. We can't even make sure that you can turn the tap water on and you won't get lead poisoning, or that you might have a water shut off. These practices are wholly inhumane. You cannot have a successful, vibrant community if you have people in your community who don't have access to water. That one of the things we are working on at Flow is to work both at the national and state levels for a national moratorium on all water shutoffs. It's absolutely inhumane, and that has to happen. The problems that I want to flag, though, and the threat of financialization of water and commodification is very, very real. I mean, it's the reason that back in 2008, the 8 Great Lakes states and 2 Canadian provinces signed the Great Lakes Compact to ban diversions outside the Great Lakes watershed. As we know, there was a loophole that allowed water that was 5.7 gallons or less to be taken out. And essentially, and the irony actually is that the company Nova, this Chinese company that came to Canada, wanted to take water out in these tankers and then put them in plastic bottles and ship it back to Canada. That was what set off the alarm bells for all of the residents and communities here in the Great Lakes region, and yet we never addressed that in the compact. And this issue has raised, is extraordinary. In 2016, bottled water outsold all soda and other liquid beverages. How did that happen? I mean, when I grew up, I never ever thought I would buy water in a bottle. I mean, it's exactly, just an anathema. But we have to be alert. We have to pay attention to what's happening with privatization of municipal services. As we've spoken about, water is and water delivery. It is a public service. So when Aquafina and Dasani, they're using public municipal systems, and they're doing reverse osmosis and then selling the water back to us, they're getting that off public, it's a public subsidy. It is. That has got to end. We also, I just want to note that we see these remarkable rising rates. Food and Water Watch has documented this very significantly, that the average customer pays about 59% more for their drinking water services and 63% more for their sewer systems when private companies take over municipal systems. We have an amazing opportunity now with we hope, bipartisan support to pass federal infrastructure packages so that we can rewrite the rules. What is a disadvantaged community? How do we make sure that the funds come to all of the states and are allocated and distributed to the communities in greatest need? That has to be a priority at every level. And that's part of the work that we're doing in community with organizations, not only in Michigan, but all in the Great Lakes. And the last thing I just want to quickly say is that water trading, for the first time ever in December of 2020, we saw, well, let's see, that there was a hedge fund and One Rock purchased Nestle, which is a huge deal because the accountability becomes less and less, with shareholders. And then also the Chicago Mercantile Exchange has future water contracts, which is very, very concerning because this all of a sudden creates water as a commodity. And we're changing the relationship with water. The impact and the import of what is happening, it's happening so fast, people are not even aware of it. One thing I want to lift up here in Chicago is the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District back in June put together this wonderful resolution for water and sanitation as a human right, and that it shall remain in the public trust. And it also challenged the notion of trading water. So that's something really to be very proud of here in Chicago. This is the kind of affirmative relationship that every community has to have with their water. And that's the kind of work we want to do. We have legislators in Michigan with H.R. 57 that was for celebrating World Water Day back in March of this year, that also assert those relationships and also acknowledge our connections and honoring the Anishinaabe people.
Okay, thank you, Liz. And with our remaining time, let's build on this spirit because I had 3 more questions, right? I wanted to kind of hear each of you, one issue about which you are very passionate, very devoted around water, Great Lakes water these days, and wrap up in there if you would. What tools do we have available, right? What can we leverage or rely on or use, whether that comes from legal traditions, history, cultural traditions? And then along with that issue on which you're focused, right? What do we need to get in place now in order to protect these relationships, the water, and the life that it sustains? So maybe we will go, right, a new direction. We'll go Frank, Liz, and Naomi, and we've got about 11 minutes left to wrap this up.
I don't know how to say all that in even a fraction of that time, but, we love water. We like to dip our toes in it. We like to swim in it. We like to look at it. We like to sail our boats on it. We like to fish in it. It makes us feel good to be around the water. I love to watch a storm on the lake. I love to watch the waves. All of these things. This is the relationship we have with the lakes. This is the relationship we have with the rain. I actually like to walk in the rain. I like to feel the rain on me. I enjoy that. It's important for us to respect that feeling that we have, that understanding, because without having that personal relationship and acknowledging that personal relationship we have with the water, the rest of this gets harder and harder to do because it gets lost in bureaucracy. It gets lost in the discussion about the infrastructure bill. It gets lost in the discussion about all of these other things, shutoffs, all these things. All of those are really, really important. but we have to understand what it is. Why are we all doing this work? Why are you here today? Why is this audience? Why did you come to this event? What motivated you to be here? Okay, and where are you gonna, what are you gonna take from this? Where are you gonna go? All those people that are watching this, virtually and will watch recordings of this event, this is something that we have to take forward. We take it in our hearts, because when we approach this issue, we have to approach it not just with our minds, but with our hearts as well. And that's going to be the thing. I think this is what Naomi was getting at about wanting to be sure that we have that relationship, that understanding. We have to do these things in order to make that next move. So I'm going to, with that, I'll pass this on.
Like you, I don't even know where to begin. But you asked about the programs and initiatives that are very near and dear. I guess I do want to talk a little bit about Line 5, because Line 5 is a 645-mile pipeline that's part of a vast network of pipelines owned by Enbridge Energy. And this pipeline runs literally through the heart of the Great Lakes in the open waters across that 5-mile stretch in the Straits of Mackinac. And the state of Michigan back in 1953 gave away, they issued a public trust easement allowing Enbridge to locate its pipeline on state-owned public trust bottomlands and waters. When they gave that away, they did not give it away in perpetuity. It was a right to use. The private interests are allowed to use public waters, but not if they are substantially likely to impair, harm, or pollute. Now, in 1953, we hadn't had Exxon Valdez or BP Horizon, but there wasn't that consciousness about what the impact of an oil spill could be. But believe me, it could and will be devastating if we do not get this pipeline out of the waters. It does not belong in our Great Lakes. The extraordinary courage of both Attorney General Dana Nessel and Governor Gretchen Whitmer to bring the lawsuits to revoke and terminate this easement so that Line 5 is out of our lakes is really extraordinary. That was something that we at FLOW fought for over 7 years with incredible coalitions at Oil and Water Don't Mix and many other amazing groups, National Wildlife Federation, Environmental Law and Policy Center, and many, many others, and also our tribal partners. The treaty rights of 5 of the federally recognized tribes with the 1836 treaty have been incredible partners. Frank's tribe, Little Traverse Band, and Bay Mills and Grand Traverse Band, and it's been an incredible partnership, and we hope that that we can, where we are in this fight is we're still battling about whether it's going to be in federal court or state court, but we hope that it is remanded to state court and that the state of Michigan can secure a preliminary and then permanent injunction to get the pipeline out of our lakes. But this is an example of how the states need and must stand up for the paramount interests of our waters and our future. And I'll just say that the public trust law actually was born here on the shores of Chicago. Back in 1892, the Supreme Court of Michigan dissolved and got rid of a fee simple title to Illinois Central Railroad that owned all of the downtown waterfront in Chicago, which is so amazing because whenever I walked to come here today, I thought all of these public lands and waters would never have been here but for public trust law and the recognition that these lands and waters belong to all of us.
That's really beautifully said, and I am really deeply moved by the humanity that we can summon to do the right thing. I would say that I have watched good people in legislatures pass really bad laws. And in 2021, the year I feel like I have a whole new life based on really witnessing up front, close and personal, how that happens. It's a combination of forces that are structural in nature, tactical, and just like any human harm, they can be done and they can be undone and not done. And so our work at Blacks in Green and Black Chicago Water Council is about that process. Somehow rights were granted or contracts were made. Somehow we sidestepped the treaties that we signed. All of these bad behaviors are correctable if we educate and mobilize our average everyday neighbors who, after all, have one of the most powerful powers in the world, which is the power of the vote. We are looking at new ways of engaging with our legislators to educate them on issues. There is science, there is data, and there are millions of really eager and idealistic college students, for example. Here we are at Columbia College. We understand legislators are overworked and underpaid from a certain perspective. But that's a structural fix. There's a way to get them the information that they need. There's a way to get them walking down the right path. And there's a way to vote them out of office if they can't get a clue. And so I think that we must look with the kind of lens that was just talked about, okay? We take that lens, we look at where the leverage points are, where the risks are, where the strengths are, and we get to work. We organize, we mobilize, and we make the decision makers who have power over the commons do the right thing, or else.
Okay, well, that deserves in and of itself a round of applause. As well as a commitment to this work. Please join me in thanking Liz Kirkwood, Naomi Davis, Frank Edowagishik for sharing this wisdom with us. Another round of applause. For the speakers, and I'll just highlight again, Liz is coming from For the Love of Water, Flow, Naomi from Blacks in Green here in our own city. Frank is our great political emissary coming from the Little Traverse Bay Bands in Harbor Springs. I'm Rachel Havrelock from the Freshwater Lab, and we would all love to continue to be in dialogue with you, to be in touch, to share resources, to hear your input and energy. And let's end on one more round of applause for yourselves for coming in person and turning out today for the water. Thank you so much.